Welcome to Never Mind The Ballots Election Countdown. Remember, subscribe at youtube.com/sunelection to never miss a Never Mind The Ballots episode. I'm Kate Ferguson, and we are exactly halfway through the general election campaign. And the fight for number 10, it's getting brutal. Keir Starmer is launching the Labour manifesto with a promise to put money back in the pockets of Brits. Meanwhile, panicked Tory MPs are warning Labour are on course for a supermajority and that Britain could turn into a one-party socialist state. But last night, Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak were both hammered by furious voters over taxes, immigration and the cost of living crisis. We will come back to pick over that debate soon. But joining me in the studio is the Sun's Noah Hoffman, and joining us down the line now is the Policing Minister and Tory MP Chris Philp. Chris, thank you so much for joining us today.
Good morning, it's good to be here.
Thank you. Now, you're the Policing Minister, Chris, and today we hear that Tory MP and close aide to the PM, Craig Williams, had put a bet on a July election just 3 days before that snap election was called. Isn't he at risk of breaking the law there?
Well, I was obviously very surprised to hear about this, but I understand it is being properly investigated by the Gambling Commission, which is the regulator who looks at the gambling industry. And I think, like with any allegation, we should let the proper process happen and see what the Gambling Commission come back with once they have looked into it.
You say you're surprised. Surely there's stronger words for this. I mean, this is somebody with potentially insider knowledge putting a bet on the election. It must be more than surprise. This is insider trading, isn't it?
Well, of course, we don't know exactly what he knew or he didn't know. I mean, speaking personally, obviously, I'm not the Prime Minister, wasn't the Prime Minister's PPS, I was Police Minister, but I didn't know about the election date until basically the Prime Minister stood up and announced it. So I don't know what he knew when. He may have known, he may not have known. I simply don't know. So that's why it's important for the proper investigation by the Gambling Commission to take place to get to the bottom of exactly what happened. That's what they're there to do. And I don't want to second guess or preempt that.
OK, how long has the Prime Minister known about this allegation concerning Craig?
I'm afraid I don't know. I've got no idea.
He keeps the Conservative Party whip and continues to stand in this election as a Conservative MP with this hanging over him?
Well, of course, he's already been nominated as the candidate. And, I don't think it's as a matter of fairness. We believe in this country in due process and, the concept of being innocent until proved guilty. There's a proper investigation happening and, that will publish its results, no doubt, in due course. And we should respond to that. I don't think it'd be fair to act preemptively without waiting for the result of the investigation.
OK, Chris, let's get on to the general election more generally. Can the Tories still win this election?
Well, I believe we can, because, of course, no votes have yet been cast. In most constituencies, it's certainly in mine, the postal ballots don't even get mailed out until next week, next Monday, for example, in my constituency. So there is still all to play for. Obviously, Labour have a big lead in the opinion polls. So I think we need to be shining a harsh light on what exactly they're proposing, because Keir Starmer's had a bit of a free ride so far. He hasn't set out very clear policies. We saw on that Sky debate last night, not really answering Beth Rigby's questions about tax. He was squirming, using phrases like no plans, which, as Beth Rigby pointed out to the audience, means that he might put taxes up. He wasn't committing to keep taxes where they are. He was leaving the door open to himself to put taxes up. The Conservatives published that detailed document a couple of weeks ago, showing that the various commitments, I think it's a total of 27 commitments Labour have made, add up to over £2,000 per household. And Labour, other than just sort of shouting that it's lies, which is nonsense, Labour have not gone through and forensically rebutted that analysis. It's got all 27 of those were costed in detail. 21.
All right, we've heard quite a lot about that dossier, Mr. Philp. I just want to ask you, yesterday, Grant Shapps said there's a danger that Labour will get a supermajority in this election. Is that language you would use, a supermajority?
Well, I think there is a danger, obviously, given the polls, that Labour will win a significant majority. That is the danger. Obviously, there's 3 weeks to go until the election. And I think people need to think quite carefully about the implications of that, because giving Keir Starmer like a blank check to do whatever a blank check drawn on our bank accounts as individuals, as taxpayers, that's quite a concerning thing when he hasn't set out clear plans. He hasn't ruled out tax rises. His shadow team, his shadow ministers have made a bunch of pledges that add up to £2,000 per household. I think giving someone in those circumstances a big majority is a very dangerous thing to do. In fact, I would say giving them any majority is a dangerous thing to do. The only way to make sure immigration comes down, the only way to make sure taxes stay as low as they can be, is to elect a Conservative government, and that's what I'm campaigning to do.
Thank you. The other Conservatives say there's a danger we're going to sleep into a one-party socialist state. Chris, isn't the truth here that you're just trying to scare voters into voting for you, not voting Reform, and just stemming the Labour majority rather than really winning this election yourself?
Well, we are definitely fighting to win because, unlike Labour, we actually have some clear plans to get immigration down. Keir Starmer has no interest whatsoever in controlling immigration. I mean, when he was a sort of lefty human rights lawyer, he even made comments insinuating that immigration laws were somehow racist. He and his party voted 139 times in the last Parliament against measures to control immigration. So he has no plans. He would see immigration go up. We have plans to get immigration down. We want to get taxes as low as we responsibly can. Labour's plans will lead to taxes rising. So there is a real choice for the public here, and we are absolutely fighting this election to win it.
You're fighting it on scare tactics, though, Chris, it sounds like.
No, we're not, because we've come up in the last 3 or 4 weeks. We've come up with the Conservatives have come up with a whole load of positive ideas, whether it's cutting national insurance even further, the enhanced triple lock to pensioners to make sure not only do they have the triple lock, but they don't pay tax on the basic pension. The support for first-time buyers. We've cut by taking them out of stamp duty for the first 425,000. We've got loads of positive ideas that will make this country better. That's a contrast to Labour. Now, you also mentioned a minute ago Reform, and what I would just say to anyone listening who is flirting with the idea of voting Reform is please don't do that if you're Conservative-minded, because if you vote Reform, it will simply hand Keir Starmer the keys of Downing Street, and he will put up our taxes and he will increase immigration. So if you're thinking about voting Reform, please don't do it. The only person it will help is Keir Starmer.
Was it wrong or a mistake of the Conservative Party not to bring Nigel Farage into the fold? You talk about voters flirting with Reform. Shouldn't you have flirted with Nigel a bit more and brought him into the Conservative Party when you had the chance?
Well, I mean, if we're going to pursue the romantic metaphor, I mean, you need consent, right? And Nigel Farage hasn't consented. He's decided to go off and do his own thing with Reform. Unfortunately, by doing that, he's essentially at risk of splitting the vote on the right and letting Labour win a whole load of constituencies, a whole load of seats around the country, which they otherwise would not have won, giving Keir Starmer a higher chance of getting into Downing Street, unfortunately.
Chris, as well as a Conservative MP and candidate in this election, you're the policing minister, and there's a lot of big, very important stories in the papers this week concerning your patch, which I wanted to talk to you about. The first was the conviction earlier this week of two 12-year-old boys of knifing a teenager to death with a machete in a totally unprovoked attack. Now, they've been convicted. They are the youngest killers in this country since Jamie Bolger's killers. The country is rightly shocked. How on earth has this happened on Britain's streets?
Well, thankfully, homicides by someone that young are exceptionally rare. As you say, it's the first time it's happened for around about 30 years. But it is absolutely shocking that two 12-year-olds did this. And yeah, it's right, obviously, that they've been arrested, prosecuted, and will be sentenced. It's absolutely horrifying that this has happened. We need to get knives off our streets. That is why I support more stop and search, stopping people where there is a suspicion they're up to no good and searching them. Labour generally doesn't support those sort of measures. I support more early intervention. So I was working on a plan, actually, just when the election was called, to identify young people. And by young, I mean sort of in that sort of 11 to 14 kind of age bracket, who are at risk of getting involved in, maybe they haven't yet got involved in serious crime, but they're at risk of getting involved in violence, and making really proactive, preventative interventions with things like mentoring, diversionary activity, maybe even cognitive behavioural therapy, different things that will get them onto the right track. And in fact, we've got some extra funding next year to roll this out. There was going to be a pilot starting in the autumn, which I really hope goes ahead, to try and identify kids like these, to stop them getting into the point where they go around carrying knives. Because I mean, as any parent would agree, is the idea of a 12-year-old carrying a knife on the streets is absolutely horrifying.
There's a couple of things I want to drill into here. They've been convicted. We're going to get their sentencing soon. Do you think they should be named, these boys? There's a huge public interest in this case.
Yeah, so obviously that's conventionally people under 18 convicted don't get publicly named because they're children. It's up to the judge to decide whether or not they should be. I think in exceptional cases, and this is obviously an exceptional case, I think the public interest may well be served by doing that, just to understand a bit more about the background to this and to learn lessons how it can be prevented in the future. So it is ultimately a question for the judge, but I think there is an exceptional public interest in this case, yes.
Thank you. One thing we heard in court in the outline of this case was that these boys were obsessed with drill music. The court heard that indeed one of the killers cleaned his machete with bleach after the murder, after hearing in a music video that that's what he should do. Are you worried that drill music is encouraging this kind of glorification of knife crime and violence on Britain's streets?
Yes, I am deeply worried about it. There's a whole Metropolitan Police unit that looks at some of these drill music songs, which in some cases expressly incite violence, or gangs use it to kind of bait each other as well. So I'm really concerned about it. The Online Safety Act will put a duty on social media companies to remove content that promotes violence. So I expect the social media companies who carry this, whether it's like YouTube, Spotify, TikTok, whatever it may be, I want them to do more, to step, even before this law comes into force fully. I want them to step up and get this content off the internet and off people's phones, because it is, I think, inciting violence in the way that it has here. And those social media firms I just mentioned, and others as well, have a moral duty to take action, and they're not taking action at the moment in the way that they should.
We've heard so much about this, haven't we? The need for social media companies, YouTube, TikTok, etc., to do more. But we've been living with those social media companies for a few years now, and they're not doing more. And it's taken years, that online safety bill, and it's still going through Parliament. So what can be done now, immediately, to put pressure on the likes of YouTube in the wake of this case?
So the Online Safety Bill became the Online Safety Act last October or November. So it's got royal assent, it's entered into law. What's happening now is that Ofcom, who are the regulator, are drafting all the codes of practice to implement the bill. Those are basically the detailed requirements on companies like Snapchat, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, and so on. So that work is being done by Ofcom, and that will all come into force in the next 12 months or so. So I'd like Ofcom to kind of get on with that and do it as quickly as possible. And that will have real teeth. That will mean that companies like Facebook, YouTube, Snapchat, TikTok could get fined up to 10% of their global revenue, billions of pounds, if they don't clean up their act and make the internet safe for children. But in the meantime, it's going to take another year or so. In the meantime, I think politicians, the media, the public should put these firms under enormous pressure to clean up their act, because their negligence, they're putting profit before children's safety. They do it again and again and again. I think it's morally unacceptable that these companies are putting money in front of children's safety. And I would just say to them, if they're listening, clean up your act now. Don't wait for the law to force you. You're going to be forced in a relatively short period of time, but don't wait for the law. Do it now, because children's lives are at risk, and other people's lives, as we saw from this tragic incident. And frankly, by not acting, they have blood on their hands.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the buying of these machetes. I'll leave aside this case for now, but I have lost count of the number of ministers, the number of governments that say they're going to crack down on the sale of machetes, zombie knives. Yet time and again we see, don't we, them being used in violent acts like this. What's going wrong? I mean, is it time you just prosecute these shop owners, these internet companies, for selling these knives?
Well, it's worth just saying, first of all, that the majority of knife homicides are actually with knives, like things like kitchen knives. But there are some committed with machetes or zombie knives, which often cause quite nasty, very nasty injuries, internal injuries as well. So we've been progressively over the last few years tightening the law up again and again and again. There have been several sets of legislation passed in the last few years, progressively tightening it up. The most recent set of laws, which I took through Parliament just a few months ago, bans a whole load of more zombie knives, zombie-style knives, and machetes, where there are little loopholes they somehow snuck through. So we're closing those loopholes. That takes effect in September of this year, so 2 or 3 months' time. We were also, before Parliament was dissolved, in the process of passing laws to increase the prison sentence for anyone that sells a knife to someone who's under 18, and give the police more powers to seize legal knives where they think they're going to be used for criminal purposes. Right. So I hope after the election, whoever wins the election, I hope those measures I just mentioned get picked up and put into law, because I was in the process of taking that through Parliament when the election got called.
Thank you, Chris. I just want to change direction just for a couple of minutes now, because the Euros are about to kick off. England's first match on Sunday, whole country getting excited. But we hear, don't we, that Germany is threatening to fine England fans €4,000 if they wear a fake shirt to the contest. Now, shirts are really expensive, these England shirts. Don't you think that's a bit heavy-handed of the German police?
Yeah, I must say, I don't know the details, but it does sound heavy-handed. I wouldn't have thought wearing a fake shirt is normally something you would expect the police to get involved in. Certainly as far as a fan is concerned, they might get involved in stopping people selling fake shirts, right? Yeah. That would be a reasonable thing for the police to get involved in. But look, it's really important that these games pass off peacefully. I know there are quite a few British police officers over in Germany helping the German police, targeting or looking at, monitoring fans that might cause a problem. Quite a few fans that have caused problems like violence in the past are not allowed to travel because they're subject to football banning orders, or they've had their passports confiscated. So a lot of work's being done to try and make sure the tournament passes off peacefully.
So should our German friends show us a bit of friendly sportsmanship and maybe lay off the fines if they see a replica shirt? Well, obviously,
obviously in no way condoning people buying fake shirts, right? People should buy shirts from the legitimate vendors, right? Because that money then goes back into football, right, into grassroots football. So people should not be buying fake shirts. But nor do I think the German police should necessarily be targeting fans in that way. They should be concentrating their efforts on maintaining public order, I would suggest.
And there's one more story we hear coming out of Germany, which is while everybody else at the tournament is getting to enjoy normal lager, apparently England fans at their first match are being served half-strength beer. And that's not happening at any of the other matches. I mean, don't you think England fans should be able to enjoy a normal pint like everybody else?
Yeah, definitely. If England fans are being somehow picked out or singled out and served watered-down beer based on their nationality, that sounds to me completely unfair, completely out of order, and probably discriminatory. We should not be getting picked on in that way. Very unfair.
Chris, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you taking time out of the campaign to join us today.
It's a pleasure. Good to be here.
Thank you. OK, no, so we saw another of these leadership debates last night, didn't we? It was this time Rishi versus Keir, although the two men didn't share a stage together. It was quite bruising for both of them, I think. Starmer asked if he's too boring to be PM. I actually think we've got a clip of that moment which we can watch.
Some people say you're boring and stiff. Tell me something. Tell me something, a morsel about yourself that will change people's minds.
Well, look.
No, I mean, is Keir Starmer too boring to be PM?
I think he is boring. I think that is an accurate description. But equally, is boring what the country wants? And if we look at the polls, it shows us that boring is the current preference above the sort of chaos that a lot of voters believe they've seen for the last 14 years. They want a bit of calm, they want a bit of stability, and Sir Keir Starmer seems to personify that for a lot of people, despite boring not necessarily being, you know, the nicest thing to be called.
Not the coolest thing to be called.
No.
Yeah, but do you think he might be kind of boring as a campaigner, boring as a leader in waiting or Prime Minister in waiting, but is he going to be more exciting as a Prime Minister? Could he do some radical stuff if he actually gets into office?
So, Kate, I followed Keir Starmer around in a big Labour bus for a week, and I can testify to the fact that he's not one to really try and spice things up for travelling journalists. And I don't think he's necessarily going to spice things up as a Prime Minister either, at least not in the short term. I have no doubt that there's sort of long-term ambitions for more sweeping changes. But we hear this line constantly from Labour, you know, there's no money left. We need to calm things down. Don't expect any sort of big flagship policies straight off the bat.
I mean, you think boring's bad. One audience member last night said he was like a robot. I think we've got that clip as well coming up.
I feel like you've formed into more of a politician than the person that I would have voted for to run the country. You seem more like a political robot. How are you going to convince others like me to vote for you?
Well, the most... Look.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's laughing in that clip because the audience member calls him a robot, and then Keir seems to kind of malfunction. What did you make of that? I mean, is Keir struggling there?
I think he was caught very much off guard by that comment. I think he was probably even genuinely offended by it. But, I mean, sort of young people who are very enthused by the sort of cool Corbyn, huge promises, can say all they want. At the end of the day, it was a disaster, and there was a sort of Tory landslide under Boris Johnson. Now, with the more robotic, you know, sometimes awkward, sometimes a bit of a snooze version of Keir Starmer and of Labour, look where they are at the polls. So I think Keir Starmer just needs to point to that to sort of win the argument.
Robot good. Rishi was also got a bit of a mauling, and Beth Rigby really didn't pull her punches last night. I think we've got a clip of Beth asking Rishi if he's preparing for his P45.
I'll surely see why so many voters think it's time for you and the Conservatives to get your P45.
Well, I can absolutely...
I mean, Noah, do you think the Conservatives have given up? I mean, is this race over? We've got 3 weeks to go, but is Keir home dry?
I mean, there was quite painful to watch because it was just so brutal. You know, it was actually somewhat of a bloodbath for Rishi Sunak. I think they've given up on winning, but they haven't given up on sort of desperately trying to cling on to as many seats as they can, and not just sort of swing seats, but safe seats as well. And that's why we've seen the change in narrative from stick with us, stick with the plan, to deny Labour the socialist state supermajority.
And I mean, there were times last night where Keir Starmer was squirming a little bit. And I think mostly when he was quizzed by Beth over his previous support for Jeremy Corbyn. I think we've got a clip of some of those exchanges now.
You asked people to elect Jeremy Corbyn as their Prime Minister. You said, I do think Jeremy Corbyn would make a great Prime Minister, Jeremy Corbyn. Did you mean that?
I was certain that we would lose the 2019 election.
That wasn't
we were not
my
ready.
question.
I was certain that we would lose it.
I mean, is that a good enough response? He says, I served under Jeremy Corbyn. I was in his shadow cabinet. He wasn't a backbencher criticising him. He was in his actual shadow cabinet, backing that manifesto. I remember going to manifesto events where Keir Starmer was on the same stage as Corbyn. And now he says, not my fault, Governor. I didn't think we were going to win. Is that good enough?
Absolutely. And it makes it even more striking when you compare what his position was to that of some of the, you know, senior shadow ministers like Wes Streeting, who said, I refuse to serve under this anti-Semitic, like, problematic figure. And we've heard the same line come out from Keir Starmer time and time again, which is that, you know, change comes from the inside. I was secretly all along, I didn't like him, and I was working, I didn't think that Labour was going to win. Is that true? Probably not. But I don't think overall at this point, the argument about Corbynism that comes from the Tories is strong enough to move the polls. So yes, this is a problem, and it's a negative for Keir Starmer, and it's something that people will look down at, but it's not enough to sort of change a vote at the ballot box at this stage.
OK. Well, Noah, thank you so much for your analysis of the debate last night. And I'm excited because The Sun have got our own Never Mind the Ballots debate coming up towards the end of the campaign, which is going to be hosted by our very own Harry Cole. Talking of Harry, he's joining us now from southern Italy, where he's with the PM Rishi Sunak for the G7 summit. Hello, Harry.
Morning.
I'm in your seat.
You are. How is it?
It looks nice and sunny over there. Tell us what's going on in Italy. Catch us up.
So, from his Grimsby grilling, the Prime Minister, lucky man, managed to get, I think, about 2 a.m. flight here to Puglia in southern Italy, where he's probably, in all likelihood, if the polls are to be believed, his last big gathering of world leaders. And actually, the G7 is a bit of a funny place at the moment because almost all of the leaders here of the sort of 7 big industrial Western countries are all in a bit of a tricky spot. Joe Biden's obviously got Trump breathing down his neck. Macron's done his own snap election. The German leader, Scholz, is pretty unpopular. And actually, it's only Giorgia Meloni, who's the host, who seems to be sort of surging in the polls now. So I wonder if behind the scenes, when they're not doing Ukraine or talking about China or the Middle East, they'll sort of bang their heads together and work out what's gone wrong for them all.
What did you make of the leaders' debate last night, Harry? I mean, we had Keir Starmer up there, Rishi Sunak as well. It wasn't easy for either of them, but what were your main takeaways?
Yeah, I think they were both hobbled away from that, licking their wounds. There was no knockout blow. There was no sort of killer moment that will be defining of the campaign, but they got duffed up pretty fair and square, both by the audience. I thought Bess Rigby was very good. And I think both of them need some better answers on a few questions. I think Starmer came after the BBC head-to-head, so he did get kind of duffed up by Sunak. I think Starmer came with a lot more energy. He was a bit sharper, but he was still very woolly on Jeremy Corbyn and previous manifestos. I think he needs to get a better answer on that. Whereas Sunak, I think, he looked a bit sort of Tigger debounced. He can be quite sort of aggressive in those sort of TV encounters, and he looked pretty bruised. He looked pretty, fed up after what's been, frankly, a torrid week for him in the campaign ever since his D-Day disaster. And, Tory strategists will want him getting sort of back to his sort of fighting self pretty quick because we're still 21 days to go, as the big sign behind you says. It's clear that it's a long time to go, and if you're looking mopey already, voters can smell that a mile off.
Is it all over for the Tories already, Harry? 3 weeks to go, but is it all over?
I mean, Chris Philp put a nice positive spin on it. No votes have been cast yet, but I think, if you look back to 2017, Theresa May was still 20 points ahead. The week she launched her manifesto, that's where it all went wrong. That's where we are in the campaign now. These things can turn, but really it's about sort of vibes at this time. It's mood. And actually, if the polls don't start to visibly tighten or visibly start to shift, it's the sort of, the mood amongst activists, amongst MPs, amongst the cabinet. Are they really going to start wanting to stick their heads above the parapet and do the morning rounds and get out there on television to get beaten up if the results starting to look inevitable? But, things can change. Things can go wrong. We'll see what's in Labour's manifesto. We're not expecting any surprises today, but, we shall see. But it's, if you just looked at those two leaders last night, one of them looked like they were fighting fit and one of them looks pretty downcast.
And you mentioned it just there, it's Labour Party Manifesto Day. This should be a big day, right? They've not won an election in 20 years. This is their big moment to present us with their blueprint for power. Is there going to be anything in it? What are we expecting?
Well, the 5 pledges became 5 footsteps, which will now become 6, key planks, whatever they're going to call them today. Won't be chiseling them in stone like Ed Miliband managed to do. But I don't think there's going to be, unless they've been pulling the wool over our eyes for literally months now. I don't think there is going to be sort of rabbits galore or big eye-catching sort of retail policies beyond the ones they've already announced. They're desperately trying to be all things to all people. I wonder whether there is going to come a time, and we saw it a little bit last night with the sort of voters sort of asking Starmer what he's going to do, especially on tax. That is definitely an Achilles heel for Starmer. I wonder whether they can really get through the next 3 weeks, suggesting that they're not actually going to say really in any clear way what they're going to do. And I do think that the spotlight really will now be on Labour. If as the poll suggests, it looks like they're cruising to victory, to actually be a little bit more candid with the voters, a little bit more honest, And it all comes back to that word trust. And, 49% of people in the YouGov poll last week think that Keir Starmer won't be a good Prime Minister. He may be ahead in the opinion polls, but his personal ratings are not great. So I do think he probably has some work to do in winning over voters, that he is actually the guy to do it. So all eyes on him.
Thanks so much for joining us, Harry. We're going to let you go off and enjoy the Italian sunshine. See you later. So you heard
Very
that.
important work trip.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it looks like no rabbits, if Harry's to be believed. But I want to thank Chris Philp so much today for joining us, Noah Hoffman for joining me in the studio, and of course, the fantastic Harry Cole, who's in Italy. This was Never Mind the Ballots Election Countdown. Remember, you can subscribe to us on youtube.com/@sunelection.